A word from our sponsors. Advertisers, are you ready to become a certified converged linear CTV and digital video media master? Introducing Nexon U, the online educational program dedicated to helping you better plan, buy, optimize, and measure your converged campaigns. Taught by industry leaders from both the buy and sell side, Nexon U experts tackle the challenging topics like data, identity, creative optimization, and more. So whether you're looking to fine-tune your existing skill set or dive deep into new concepts, Nexon U is the place to be. Enroll today at u.nexon.com. Again, that's u.nexxen.com.
This podcast is brought to you by AudioHook, the leading independent audio DSP. AudioHook has direct publisher integrations into all major podcast and streaming radio platforms, providing 40% more inventory than what could be accessed in omnichannel DSPs. What's more, AudioBook has full transcripts on more than 90% of all podcast inventory, enabling advanced contextual targeting and brand suitability. AudioHook is so confident that in addition to CPM buys, they offer the industry's only pay-for-performance option, where brands can scale audio and podcasting with peace of mind knowing they are only paying for outcomes. Visit audiohook.com to learn more. That's audiohook.com.
Welcome to the AdTechGod Pod, your window into the world of advertising technology and the people behind it. I'm your host, AdTechGod. Welcome to the AdTechGod Pod, where we speak with the marketers in our industry. Today, we're joined by Tom Goodwin from All We Have Is Now. I've been a huge fan of Tom's for a while now, so having him here is actually pretty cool to me. He's an avid marketer, public speaker, and super knowledgeable about the advertising space. He's former Publicis, Havas, TWA, and more. Tom, I'm really excited to chat with you today. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Question for you. I start every pod the same way. So I wanted to ask you, you've become a brand. You're top marketer on LinkedIn. You do public speaking, but how did you get into the advertising industry, particularly with the agencies, and what brought you to your point today?
I got in by mistake. I mean, I think many people are in this industry for that reason. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a very sort of curious, lively person, which I think means, pain in the ass. And one day I was doing a temporary job for a TV company, and my boss at the time said, "You'd be great in advertising." So I wrote to many large advertising agencies for their graduate training programs. I didn't get into any, but 3 years into a kind of large blue chip training program for a big pharmaceutical company, I kind of couldn't help but notice the advertising people seemed to be having a good time. So I wrote to all of the people that declined to give me jobs before, and one of them let me in. And then I sort of failed upwards. I was kind of pretty terrible almost at every single job. But people sort of liked me, and they thought there was something about me that would be valuable, just not for them right then. So I sort of morphed from a terrible account manager to being a pretty bad strategist. And then over time, I got more interested in technology. I got fascinated. This was sort of 2006 time, so I was about 5 years into the industry at this point, and I was working a lot with Nokia. And it was very apparent that we had these things called mobile phones that could do more and more, and they were going to have a really big impact on the way that we lived our lives. And I got asked into lots and lots of conversations about the future. At the time, it was called the 2020 working group, because 2020 was always a long way off. And we would just discuss, it was called user-generated content. It was called micro-blogging. We were talking about the sort of impact of these devices on our lives. And we were kind of right, actually. It sounds a bit arrogant and a bit unlikely, but many of the predictions that we made about the future turned out to be correct.
So we were chatting before the pod, and we talked a lot about just the modern advertising, the modern marketer, and how there seems to be such a big disconnect between the promises we hear in the market and what the actual experience is for consumers. I'd love to hear your opinion, and then I'll chime in too on this pod. I don't mind. Where do you feel that disconnect is, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm using this podcast as free therapy because I'm really frustrated because I really care. So I came into the industry in about 2001, and advertising was amazing, and it still is amazing, and it's full of remarkable people who work really hard, and they're really curious, and they are obsessed with people, and they're obsessed with sort of connections, and they're obsessed with ideas. I now feel quite embarrassed almost to be part of the industry. Like somehow it seems to be kind of missing its ambition. It seems to be missing its innovation. I think we need to remember that to work in advertising is somewhat of a privilege. I used to have my boss a long time ago had a T-shirt which said, "Advertising helps me decide." And I thought it was amazing because it was kind of funny, but it was kind of true. Like when you go shopping in Japan, it takes you a really long time and you don't feel that good about what you're about to eat because you're not sure what it is or if it's going to be right. If you try and buy a sort of T-shirt in a mall in Peru, you don't really know what the brands mean. You don't know whether you're being a sort of loser by purchasing a certain type of jeans. And it kind of occurs to me that brand building and advertising is probably becoming more and more important, helping people make decisions in a world of abundance, helping people feel better about the decisions they make, telling people about things that they might not otherwise know about. It's unbelievably important. And the environment that we're doing this in is amazing. I mean, you could not invent a better device for marketing than a mobile phone. Whether it's the high resolution screen, whether it's the ability to have sound, whether it's the 5G connectivity, the fact it's got your mobile wallet attached to it, the fact it knows who you are, it's unbelievable. And then the sort of promise of advertising is amazing because you go to all these sort of conferences and you see these extremely charismatic and well-spoken people talk about, intent-based marketing or conversational platforms or some new AI IQ system. And you think, fuck, I'm going to leave this event and have these seductive, beautiful, relevant, personalized ads served to me. And instead, what you get is beyond a joke. I mean, I'm one of those weird people that doesn't have their ad blocker turned on. And the most common form of advertising that I see is something that's designed to be precise, but quite wrong in a way that makes it useless. And we've become obsessed with this idea that we can be ultra sophisticated. So I can track my run on Strava, and then I'll be served an Advocatorade or something. Or, because I visited McDonald's, Burger King is going to send me an ad to a burger just as I'm in McDonald's. And we've become obsessed with the sophistication and the intelligence. And I think it's almost entirely wrong. I think it's not working. And I don't think anyone seems to have noticed or they don't care. And therefore, I'm here to sort of discuss why it's not working, if it's working, and what we can do about it to make it better.
You touched up on the branding part. I think some companies are doing a really good job with positioning themselves in market, making their product unique, make people interested in buying it. I mean, if you take a look at, I would say, based on my kids, like the trends that they see that they love and the products that they love, they do a great job promoting it and brand building it. But the delivery method has changed. Like a lot of what they learn from is no longer a TV ad, although that happens. A lot of it's happening on social media. And I think as someone who's active on social media, brand building continues to be important, but I'm not sure all brands are doing it the right way. I think a lot of brands are ignoring the importance of building that brand and that loyalty. And rather they're focusing on conversions and performance. And that's actually impacting their brand negatively rather than positively.
I'm not in the industry, and therefore it means I don't know as much, but it also means I get to see things quite holistically. And what seems very apparent to me is probably the most interesting question out there is what has changed in the last 20 years and what has not changed in the last 20 years and what should we be doing about it? And broadly speaking, and again, I might be completely wrong here, but broadly speaking, I think there's two tribes. There's the kind of big brand building, kind of mass media buying sort of tonnage business, the sort of likes of Unilever or automakers or Samsung. And they're probably a little bit reluctant to really accept how much the world has changed and the degree to which they're not measuring the right things and they don't really know what they're doing. And then there's this sort of other tribe of sort of growth marketers that have been used to pretty limited budgets that are launching things from scratch that are perhaps not trained marketers. And this sort of tranche of people has done an incredible job of scaling up, but have never really sort of learned the sort of mystery of advertising and the patience of advertising and the sort of seduction of advertising. And they've become completely obsessed with kind of hourly trackers and attribution. And the weird thing is now these companies are spending a fortune. I mean, you'll have companies like, I think it's Ridge Wallets that are spending $50 million a year on Facebook advertising alone. So these are heavy hitters full of people that do sort of know what they're doing. But I think they've become incapable of understanding what they don't know, which is that actually, brands are kind of built on weird things like wastage. Brands are built on weird things like consistent messaging that doesn't change over time. And therefore, they've become very, very good at sort of immediately getting people in a limited pool to straight away spend their money with them. But their ability to reach new people or to sort of launch new products or to do something which happens over a longer period of time. At the end of the day, if you take a step back and you say, what new brands have we seen launched from digital media in the last 15 years? The list is surprisingly short, and most of those things are really products rather than brands. It'll be someone like Airbnb where people like the platform rather than thinking that the brand's particularly good.
I feel like the consumer behavior has changed a lot too. I think this need for instant gratification, the ease of purchasing products, like that drove a lot of the marketing strategy behind these products in market and how they market it. But the brand building is, as you mentioned, slow. Like it takes time and consistency. I know with building my brand as building AdTechGod, and it took me 3 years of making no money and focusing on just what I'm delivering on, fine-tuning my messaging, continuing with that on the way through, and then turning it into something that became into a media company. But I feel that branding overall has turned into clicks and purchases. And that doesn't necessarily live long term. I think you live by the click and you die by the click. So the second you pull the plug on media budgets, your purchases drop substantially because there's no real love for the brands in market.
The degree to which, it sounds a bit like the McNamara fallacy, but the degree to which we've become so good at measuring things precisely and cheaply that about 50% of the advertising world kind of thinks they can see everything, and they think that everything they can see really matters, which is one thing. But then they don't seem to have any interest or ability to see any value in anything that can't be tracked. And I think that means we're entering a kind of weird environment where, again, about half of the marketers out there are still using the old-fashioned playbook, and I don't think it's really working. I personally will never watch TV that's sort of broadcast to me. And therefore, the ability of these companies that used to place ads in magazines and newspapers and TV, they just can't get hold of me. But at the same time, if I go on a platform like Facebook or Instagram, where I'm actually continually amazed by how well targeted most of the ads are, you won't see any traditional brands there. You won't see sort of Nissan talking about a new car. You'll see a kind of class action lawsuit for mesothelioma or something. And it's sort of utterly bizarre to me. And I'm not being miserable here, but considering the potential we have, like no one seems to be getting it right. Like everyone seems obsessed with short-termism. Everyone seems obsessed with measuring everything, even if it doesn't matter. Everyone seems to go into these meetings where they'll look at a spreadsheet all day rather than actually look at the ads that we're showing people. Once I sort of bought an ad campaign for myself on Meta, and it was amazing to me that the one thing that the process didn't seem to care about at all was the actual ad that I created. And now we see sort of movements towards, AI-driven advertising, where the kind of hope is that you can just upload a few crappy pictures of a pair of shoes and press a magic button, and then perfectly adequate imagery comes out of it and then gets placed automatically. And then you can spend all of your time looking at numbers in the spreadsheet. It seems completely removed from people's lives and what builds allure and what gets people to think that something's beautiful and what makes someone unreasonably attracted towards something. For a long time, sort of marketing has been the study of how weird humans are and how illogical we are. It's almost the sort of opposite to economics. It's basically exploring and taking advantage of the fact that we make strange decisions in strange ways.
It's funny because you mentioned, the lack of, I guess it would be emotional attachment to a AI generated image or AI generated ad. So I think I'm bullish on AI generated ads, but probably more for smaller businesses that don't have the budget for creative agencies. But larger brands, like, if you have a car dealership that wants to promote their used car sale tomorrow and you want to be on TV or you want to buy on the web, you don't have the resources or the marketing department to do it. Great. Like AI generated ad works. Come visit us on the corner of Main Street. Like we're here to sell you a car. But for true brands, I don't know if it's scalable and I don't know if it's the right angle. I also think there's a massive lack of emotional attachment. I think people are genuinely emotional. I think they want to feel whatever the ad is delivering, whether that's joy, sadness, urgency, whatever that emotion is that your brand wants to deliver on has to be delivered. I don't know if AI will do that. It might, but I don't think AI will do that. And I feel that a lot of brands out there are missing out on an opportunity to really touch on to something that will make people loyal to their brand and have them go buy. And instead, they're just so focused on short-term, honestly, earnings rather than focusing on long-term brand building and loyalty.
I mean, I appreciate your stance on this and your nuance, because you seem to sort of understand both worlds, because we do have the kind of data and algorithm solve everything tribe. And they kind of think that if you upload things and then you just automatically optimize and you run continual experimentations, then you get to the best result. And I don't think that's right. But then there's also the other side that sort of believes in filmmaking and the art and the sort of mystery and the magic. And they're ignorant to the fact that if one ad does appear immediately to be performing better than the other, then you're probably an idiot to sort of override that. You know, we need to find a way through this sort of middle ground. And again, this is a hypothesis, but I do wonder if we're not making everything way, 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 way more complicated than it needs to be. I've recently done a huge project for a huge sort of car company, and I was looking at their dealer advertising. So it's interesting that you should bring that up. And there's a lot of research that shows that even when people are buying new cars, they want to see the actual car that's the real car shot by a real person in the showroom. And that research and that very sort of hard metric drives probably about $200 million worth of photography fees every year. The problem is all of these ads look absolutely shit. So you go on any sort of platform and you see the actual, Honda Camry from 2025 with a roof rack or something, and it doesn't look like an attractive car. And then you'll see something for kind of Lucid or for Polestar or a direct-to-consumer brand, and it'll look really, really nice. And you do sort of wonder, I don't know, maybe let's ignore the data a little bit. Maybe let's just take a picture of a car that looks really nice. If 83% of people shop for cars based on the monthly payment rather than the cash payment, why don't we advertise the lease price? And why don't we just make the ad sort of seem quite confident and bold? Why don't we, click to a landing page where, it shows the phone number to phone up and the email address quite clearly? I kind of wonder if we haven't got so obsessed with the sophistication and the precision that we haven't realized that actually, making a car look good is probably more important than anything else. The conversation about AI and generating ads is quite interesting to me, because most of the time about 15 to 20 times more is spent on media than production. And therefore, the idea that you can go to a company and say, you're still going to spend $15 million on media, but now the ad is only going to cost $50 to make rather than $10,000. It seems to me that you might as well make the very most perfect ads if you're going to spend that much money on media behind it.
I feel like, first, I agree with you. I think the balance is off. I think what was a heavy creative and then media was the delivery method, because it was simple. Like, we run in a newspaper, we're going to use automotive. We run in a few localized newspapers, magazines, etc., that are distributed to your home or in your mailbox, and we're going to run on radio, and we're done. Maybe a billboard. And now with connected television, traditional television, all the digital channels, mobile, social, it gets complicated. And I'm not sure whether there's enough investment happening on the creative side. It's obviously having a very negative impact on the agencies, on where the money is going and how that money is being allocated. I just don't know if creative is as big of a focus as it used to be. And I think it's not the right move. I just not sure how we could reverse it.
I think one has to acknowledge that the agencies have done a very bad job of arming themselves for these conversations. So I think what you describe is absolutely true. I just think that most agencies have tried to win this argument by being kind of aloof or arrogant, or saying, you don't believe in the magic of my pencils, rather than saying in a more robust way, here are 5 case studies. You're measuring the wrong things. You're being sold on technology that you don't need. that question of, if you had a new TV launch in 1999 and you had to do the same kind of thing this year, what would be different? I always find that a fascinating question, because we do tend to kind of obsess over the complexity, and we look at the lunarscape and we think that the solution is to have, some sort of DMP that's uploaded with all these other numbers. And then we have all these, cookies that are everywhere. And then we track everything. And then we align that with another customer data platform. And then we retarget. And you do sort of wonder, well, if it's a really nice TV that looks good on the wall and it has digital art, maybe kind of everyone should know about that. Maybe it's not a terrible thing if an 8-year-old grows up thinking that LG TVs are a little bit better. You do sort of wonder, to what extent are we losing a lot of money in a kind of technology tax that actually doesn't grow the pie?
What, in your opinion, would fix it? Like, what's the right move? Is it investment in better creative? Is it a shift of budgets away from performance and towards branding? Is it the combination of those two? How do you think it can be fixed?
Yeah, I think there are a very small number of extraordinary marketers out there. And what they have done is they have demonstrated to their peers and to their stakeholders and to the trade as a whole that they get it, that they get technology, that they're not these sort of dinosaurs that fell asleep on the watch of the internet. And it's a bit like sort of Picasso. Picasso can do abstract art because he learned how to draw, realist art first. Therefore, he had this sort of confidence to subvert it. And I think when you can demonstrate to people that you know what you're doing and you've got good judgment and you have the kind of, the cultural permission, you can then say no to things. And you can then say, I'm going to invest in some media and some platforms and some creative that will look good in a spreadsheet. And then I'm going to do some things that create results over a much longer period of time. And you're just going to have to believe me that I think the role of a CMO today is to effectively be watering the trees at the same time as harvesting some apples. And if you spend too much time harvesting the apples, you just screw over the person that comes into your job in 4 years' time. And if you only water the apple trees, then you don't get any apples. And I think that balancing act is the job. But it takes a lot of confidence, because ultimately, and I talk to a lot of CMOs about this, ultimately the sort of CFO and the CEO are increasingly, well, they've always been quite ignorant to advertising. And if you go into one meeting one day and say, look, we spent 52 million and we had a return of ad spend on 6.1, after that point, it becomes almost impossible to justify anything that doesn't have a trackable return on ad spend. And it also becomes impossible to justify almost anything that's below that number, because they just keep on thinking, well, why don't you do the thing with the bigger number? There are exceptions. For some reason, companies are very happy to spend money on event marketing. They're very happy to spend it on sponsorship. But I think we live in this world which, I don't know if it's my term or if I'm borrowing it from Rory Sutherland, but it's like the sort of arithmetocracy, where essentially every single conversation that we have has to be backed up by numbers. And I'm not arguing for some kind of ignorant, removed from reality, suspension of belief kind of argument. But I'm just saying, one should be able to go into a meeting and say, don't look at the sun, without showing a case study of people that are being blind. One should be able to say it's important to build brands for the future, because otherwise our future is terrible. And also there's wastage that happens in ways that lead to good things that we can't track. One should be able to say quite reasonable things without having to get out an Excel spreadsheet every time.
You think we've been distracted by the metrics?
I think even more than that. I think, and I mean this with the greatest respect, ad tech people are really good at selling. And they do this amazing sort of dance of the fun and the sort of, taking clients out for a good time. They do an amazing job of kind of whipping up a sense that you're missing out. So unless you've got, 153 different technology companies in your ad stack, then, and unless you've done sort of integration tests, unless you've done all that wizardry, then you're an idiot. So they sort of create the fun and the allure, the sort of fear of missing out. They pull the wool over people's eyes. And then they provide amazing data to show that it all works. I mean, when I worked at IPG in their media lab, it was my job to create experiments to show that technology companies had products that worked. And no one seems to realize that while these results are kind of robust, in inverted commas, they have been designed to get the response. So every car dealership these days has about 27 different plugins attached to their websites because they've all been sold on a technology by a vendor. And trust me, they had a good case study, and it sort of appears to be true that a chatbot sells more cars, but it doesn't pass the smell test, really. This idea that someone's going to walk away with a BMW 7 Series, because a website and a chatbot. We need more sort of confidence in our conviction, I think.
On the flip side, how do you think it's impacted consumers? We're talking about the advertiser side, the focus on metrics, the focus on tech, maybe less of a focus on creative. How do you think the digitization, if we want to call it, of advertising has impacted the consumer with their user experience?
I would actually enjoy spending more time understanding modern consumer attitudes towards advertising. I haven't done the research myself, so everything I say is a sort of theory. There was a time when we grew up when TV ads would be on TV as TV shows, be the 25 best ads of the week or something, or the funny ads. And when the Oscars come around or the Super Bowl come around, we love advertising. We love looking at them. We love seeing all the celebs that are on them. They become part of the culture. And I think advertising has moved from being a big part of the culture that sort of created and reflected culture and was part of a shared sense of culture. It was a bit different growing up in the UK, but we'd have sort of infamous ads. We had one called the Tango ad where two people sort of slapped each other, and it got banned in schools because kids were sort of copying the slap from the ad. We used to feel kind of big and glamorous, and now we've become the kind of shit that gets in the way of the stuff we want. We by and large, we are now the thing to swat away. And one of my sort of trends that I talk about when I do my keynotes is, advertising has now become insidious. So it's become, influencers will kind of suddenly start talking about a new type of pet treat, halfway through their review of Remover luggage. Like advertising's been sort of snuck in like the sort of broccoli in a kid's meal. And I think these days, most people have a pretty disdainful attitude towards ads. They think the ads are the thing that gets in the way of the stuff they're trying to watch. They think that the ads are the things that get their kids to buy stuff they don't need. And I don't think it needs to be like that. Like if we're all spending quite a lot of money and we all need help on knowing how to spend that money in a better way. And for me to know that there's a new route that's opened up between Miami and Rome, on ITA Airways, that's not a terrible thing to know about. And I think this sort of drive towards ever more aggressive, ever more micro-targeted, ever more cheap-looking, scam-like, sort of slightly fraudulent feeling ads, it's sort of dirtied the water for everyone. And I think brands increasingly feel like they need to sort of use that playbook. And what I would love them to do is to do the opposite. It's to be a bit grander and bigger and more premium and more elusive and more vague. And just say something beautiful like, Samsonite luggage, it looks as good as this. Or, Honda, the power of dreams. Just we need a sort of counter reaction to the kind of precision and the science and the sort of warfare, I think, of modern advertising technology.
Yeah, one of the things I get the most, because I tell people I work in advertising. I don't tell them I'm like a deity, but I do tell them I work in advertising. And the biggest thing for them is like, why did I get this ad? And it's really weird. And I visited a site and now I'm getting retargeted. And I was just looking because somebody mentioned the shoe, but now all I see is that shoe on this ad everywhere I go. And I usually just say, well, we're watching you, and I creep them out a little bit. But it is a creepy feeling. Like if you don't come from the industry and you don't understand why you're getting served this ad everywhere you go, there is a sense of, okay, this is scary. Now, if that creative, or if let's say you looked at a Nike shoe, like it's okay to not target them with the same exact shoe. Maybe they are in the market to buy a shoe. So show them an ad, but don't show them that specific shoe. But the metrics show, no, if you show them 57 times, they're going to convert. But the reality is like, maybe you try a different product. Like maybe you mix it up a little bit. Like don't make it so creepy that you're following them everywhere they go. Give them an experience. Use that as an opportunity to brand build. Maybe they're not sold on Nike as the shoe of choice. Maybe they love Adidas. And maybe what they're trying to do is explore other options. So don't keep showing them the same shoe. Show them something different. Like get them engaged and attached to your shoe brand without making them feel weirded out and creepy.
It seems weird because, again, there's so much sophistication, intelligence, and sort of passion. And I can't help but think, the thinking that shows that every time we send out the newsletter again, another 1% of people will buy something means that ultimately you end up with 99% of people starting to unsubscribe after a couple of hours because you've just been inundated with, Nordstrom telling you it's Father's Day again.
I've been there.
And for every person that counts the incremental sort of money from every email, I don't know if there's anyone counting the number of people that unsubscribed or the number of people that blocked or the number of people that got pissed off or the number of people that, feel differently about that brand now. And I do wonder if we're counting every single positive thing and never counting the cost of doing stuff that's quite harmful to people. And this idea that we all have enough imagination and empathy to think, like if someone's just bought a toaster, let's not tell them 5 other toasters to buy. Maybe tell them about a kettle.
Right.
Maybe tell them about, a sort of a TV screen that sits on the fridge. Maybe they've got interested in tiling or plants at the moment. And it's remarkable to me that no one seems to sort of go around with this level of thoughtfulness based on the idea that actually, if you ask people if they like being tracked, they say no. And if you say what's some of the worst things about modern advertising, they say, I hate how targeted it is. And then if you ask them what they dislike most about advertising, they will also say, well, they don't like irrelevant ads. So I think our big takeaway here is how do we aim for relevance, but not personalization? And how do we aim to be helpful and considerate and somewhat sort of highbrow in a way where we draw people to us? I think modern advertising has become obsessed with let's insert ourselves amongst a group of people that are interested in this. And then when someone does something, we're going to take all the credit. If we can find ourselves in the journey of someone buying a Kia, then we can say that it was our ad that made them do that. And actually that desperation to be part of the process, I think, is leading to us completely misunderstanding how advertising works. And the fact that, it was a friendly dealer that we went to 6 months ago that remembered our mum was sick, that's probably the reason we bought and not the sort of ad that jammed itself in the way right at the last second.
Companies are very good at taking credit. I actually posted a meme about that this morning. And it literally says, when your campaign wins an award for attribution, but you have no idea what contributed to the conversion. And it's true. Like very, very good at that. It's a common thing that everybody's like, well, it's because they saw it here or saw it there. And, measurement is still a challenge.
Do you think there's any hope in the industry taking a bit of a step back and rather than getting closer and closer to the point of purchase and ever more targeted and ever more personalized and ever more numbers based? Is there within your sort of vantage point a movement the other way to just go, people are on mobile phones and we can make fantastic ads and maybe it's okay if someone didn't buy something immediately as a result?
Yes and no. I think that there are people who agree with you and I that there needs to be some sort of change in just the strategy overall. I think it's converting those brands and the people that are managing their budgets. When a brand says we want to move $10 million of toothpaste, well, the goal now is to get people to buy toothpaste today. And so then the budgets shift towards that particular KPI or towards that, RFP that they got. And they're out in market just saying, buy this toothpaste, buy one, get one free, buy one, get a free toothbrush. Hey, here's some mouthwash. Also, here's a 50-cent coupon. and that just becomes the strategy behind it. So I think that in general, like the ad tech industry, and who I can kind of speak about, is focused on better messaging and better delivery. But I think when it comes down to brands, well, they want conversions, and then we want to fulfill that requirement. So it turns into tech that's built to convert and not built to build a brand or to entice people to love a brand. So yeah, I mean, I think there's some hope, and I think there's a lot of companies doing great creative stuff, and not just AI creative, but how to optimize around creative, how to measure and understand what's happening and the emotion behind it. So yes, but I think it's just a slow learning curve. But I hope we go back to a point where I say, I really love those damn polar bears from Coca-Cola because that was years and years ago and I still love it. And it's bizarre to me that out of all the ads that I look back on, I love that Coca-Cola ad. As an adult, like it's nostalgic for me. Like I loved those polar bears. I thought they were cool. I think I even had a stuffed animal that was a polar bear. So to me, it's like build that brand and that love. And what do you know? 20 years later, I'm still drinking Coca-Cola, not Pepsi.
That's the crazy thing is the timescale. I mean, if I was to open up every cupboard in my apartment right now and look in the doors, the things that I am buying now are a result of if you had to sort of somehow scientifically plot it, and you couldn't, they'd be ads that I got when I was 6 to 15 years old. That's the payback period. The toothpaste is actually a very good random example for you to choose because it's very hard to launch a new toothpaste because people need to trust it. If anything you stick in your mouth that's slightly sort of medicinal, you need like the recognition of a big brand behind it. And no amount of free floss or free mouthwash or 50-cent off coupons is going to make most people buy a toothpaste brand they've never heard of. But in this current environment, it will look like that activity that happened at the last second that created the success, and not the fact that, in 1987, Colgate did a massive TV campaign about dentists recommending their product.
Right. Amazing. Tom, thank you so much for being here. I hope we can chat again soon.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Same here, Tom. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the AdTechGod Pod, a podcast for the people, about the people. Stay connected with me for more insights, trends, and interviews in the realm of ad tech. Don't miss out on the latest updates, so follow me on X, Instagram, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't forget, ATG Slack community has insights, networking opportunities, and jobs. Keep the conversation going and stay at the forefront of ad tech innovation.